2004's The Batman had the unenviable task of being the first Batman show to follow Batman the Animated Series, and that was a dangerous thing to be. BTAS was so definitive it practically fossilized itself into pop culture the moment it hit the air. Worse still, the broader continuity of the DC animated universe was still alive and thriving through Justice League Unlimited. So the creative team made a choice. Rather than try to compete in the same arena, they pivoted. The character designs were more angular, exaggerated, and kinetic. Action sequences were faster with a focus on tight fight choreography, and the scripts were less complex. The tone was brighter, more accessible, and unmistakably contemporary to the mid-2000s. Where its predecessor embraced operatic tragedy, this series leaned into momentum. And that shift in philosophy also impacted the villains. In this series, the rogues were less often defined by festering psychological wounds that challenged the audience. Instead, they were usually bold concepts, less concerned with motivations. At the same time, the writers took the opportunity to adapt some lesser-known Batman villains. Characters like the Clue Master, Killer Moth, and the subject of today's video, Gearhead. With the best will in the world, Gearhead is not an A-lister. Frankly, it feels generous calling him a Z-lister, but that's what makes him ripe for reinvention. And I feel like what the writers did with him perfectly encapsulates the ethos of the show as a whole. To illustrate my point, let's first talk about the comic book original. Gearhead first appeared in Detective Comics number 712, published in 1997. He was Nathan Finch, an engineer at General Robotics working on the Androcles program, a cutting-edge bionics initiative looking to fuse man and machine. He is intelligent, technically gifted, and deeply proud of his work. But after a dispute with his employer, he kidnapped the boss's daughter, Gloria Osteen, and demanded a ransom. This took place early in Batman's career, and he viewed it as one of his defining failures. In the chase, Finch took Gloria onto a frozen river, but they fell through the ice. Fortunately, Batman quickly rescued Gloria, but he couldn't get to Finch in time. From Finch's perspective under the ice, all he could see was a looming silhouette watching him drown. His body was dragged away by the underwater current and washed up on a riverbank where he was found by two men. They took his seemingly lifeless body to an underworld figure, Dr. Bascom, thinking they could get some money for his organs, but upon closer examination, Bascom realized that Finch was still alive. He had suffered extreme frostbite and had to have his arms and legs amputated to save his life. Dr. Bascom fitted him with some basic prosthetic limbs, and after months of rehab, Finch used his knowledge of robotics to enhance them, gradually becoming more machine than man. Years later, he returned to his former employer, now run by Gloria, and demanded some cutting-edge tech that he could use to further enhance himself. Gloria believed that he held a grudge against her, but really he was out to get Batman. His hatred of Batman is not cartoonish spite, it's anchored in that single frozen moment beneath the icy water. He believed he was deliberately abandoned, and from there he casts off his humanity to become a machine driven by hatred. The comics lean into that obsession. Gearhead refers to Batman as vermin, reducing the Dark Knight to prey in his private predator fantasy. The Batmobile is crucial to this rivalry. Their clashes escalate into vehicular warfare, electromagnetic pulses, remote-controlled decoys, high-speed pursuits through Gotham streets, the whole shebang. In one of his most memorable moments, Gearhead reveals that he isn't merely driving a vehicle of his own construction, he is integrated with it, and the machine responds to his every thought as if it were one of his limbs. Keep that in mind for later on. Of course, Batman defeats him time and again, and each confrontation results in the destruction of his limbs, but he always comes back. In the lead-up to the No Man's Land crossover, Gearhead was one of the assassins hired by Nicholas Scratch to help ensure that Gotham was abandoned by the US government. He kidnapped Nightwing, but Robin saved the day. In the struggle, Gearhead accidentally set off some explosives, which destroyed his limbs again. But once Gotham was cut off from the rest of the world, he couldn't repair himself. There was no electricity and resources were scarce. So he formed a partnership with another obscure Batman villain, Tommy Mangles. Gearhead was the brains while Mangles was the muscle, and the pair defended what little they had. Until they wandered into Mr. Freeze's territory and the pair were frozen, echoing Gearhead's original trauma. It's a bleak trajectory, but that bleakness is the point. He began as a man who lost his limbs, but because of his blind hatred, he becomes a man who loses himself entirely. And what's really important is that the comics never soften that edge. Gearhead is grotesque, obsessive, and pathetic. He's a freakish villain defined by misunderstanding, an inflated ego, and self-inflicted transformation. So with that dark history established, it's probably a little surprising to hear that he showed up in The Batman, given its focus on more child-friendly stories. What shouldn't be surprising though is that very little of the character is retained. There is no frozen lake, no amputations, no traumatic misreading of a failed rescue, and no festering belief that Batman let him die. Instead, when Gearhead arrives, there's no explanation of who he is or what motivates him. He just turns up at a charity race and steals the winnings. Unlike his comic book counterpart, who wants Batman to recognise him, this Gearhead wears a yellow and black mask. He also has had one of his eyes replaced with a camera, giving him a distinctive cybernetic heterochromia. He's a criminal technophile armed with nanotechnology and is centred around a yellow sports car. In fact, the car is his unique hook. They don't even reveal his real name or his origin. All anyone talks about is that car. I feel like they took a look at that one scene from the comic where he reveals that he has become a vehicle and thought, that's it, that's our guy. But instead of some cobbled together vehicle with spider legs, they opted for an obnoxious sports car. Rather than integrating his body with specific technology, he uses the catch-all nanotech to transform any vehicle into his sports car and to seize control of machinery. He upgrades cars mid-chase, turning Gotham's streets into racetracks. There's no emotional hook behind his crimes though, he just likes the thrill of the chase. He's more of an extreme sportsman than anything else, and most importantly, he has no emotional tether to Batman. Batman is simply the obstacle at the end of the track. Their dynamic shifts from personal grievance to competitive pursuit. Hero versus adrenaline junkie, not hero versus damaged victim. Even the nature of his technology reflects the tonal shift. Unlike comic Gearhead, who rebuilds himself in order to avenge himself, animated Gearhead's nanotech is a sleek, visually impressive playground of transformation. The emphasis is on what looks cool in motion rather than loss and vengeance, and boy, doesn't that just sum up the Batman as a whole. Gearhead is not a tragic figure, he's a chase sequence with a face. While he only appeared in one episode and was defeated by the security measures built into the new Batmobile, he appeared a handful of times in the tie-in comic, The Batman Strikes. In issue number 22, Gearhead returned with further upgrades and steals an expensive car, kidnapping bungling detective Cash Tankinson. Arguably the most striking image from the issue was Gearhead's monster truck, but he was taken down relatively easily. But in issue 36, his backstory was fleshed out a little bit. When Batman confronts Gearhead, he reveals that he knows his secret. Nathan Finch had been a hothead underground street racer until he crashed his car and was seriously injured. One day, someone turned up and gave him the nanotech that would be used to augment his body. Batman doesn't know who did it, and neither does Finch. He says that he doesn't care who helped him, all he cares about is the power it has given him. It felt like the writers were setting something up. Perhaps the big revelation would be that an evil mastermind, maybe Lex Luthor, was using Gearhead to test out his new technology, but that plot point was never followed up on. Unlike his comic counterpart in Detective Comics, whose transformation is steeped in trauma and warped perception, this version's origin feels like negative space. There was a life before the upgrades, but it's insignificant without any emotional weight attached to it. Now, while this version of Gearhead is pretty light on character, it's interesting to note that he seemed to have had an impact on his comic book counterpart. After his ambiguous fate during No Man's Land, Gearhead returned in 2006 in the miniseries Rush City, where he became a living vehicle. Granted, he hasn't really been used all that much since then. It's just a shame that we haven't seen original characters like Ethan Bennett or Ellen Yin jump over to the comics, but that is an entirely separate matter. Ultimately, Gearhead is a really strong example of how the Batman adapted characters. He went from a deeply disturbing obsessive kidnapper, potentially more machine than man, driven by hate, to a living car whose thrill of motion supersedes any trace of trauma. Even when the tie-in comics added some backstory, it was immediately dismissed by Gearhead himself. Unimportant, meaningless, something he'd rather forget. And I have to wonder if perhaps he was minimising his trauma there, but we'll never know for certain. It shows that adaptation is more than a change of art style or tone, it's just as much a statement of priorities. Where the comics explore consequence, guilt and obsession, the Batman emphasises velocity, visibility, and vigour. Gearhead highlights the different philosophies of the comics and the show. One focuses on moral and emotional weight, the other on kinetic entertainment. Whether you think that's a good thing or not is a matter of personal taste, but I think it also demonstrates the show's versatility. The Batman was willing to take risks with lesser-known characters, reshaping them to fit its own energetic, toyetic vision rather than simply retelling old stories. While it may sacrifice the emotional depth, it proves that Batman can accommodate more than one style, more than one philosophy, and still hold the audience's attention. In the end, Gearhead shows how Gotham can be dark and tragic, or fast and thrilling, depending on who's telling the story. Okay, that's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time, I'll be back on Monday, and I want to return to the streets of Neo Gotham to discuss an unusual episode of Batman Beyond, but one that struck a chord with me about love and betrayal. It's time to look at April Moon. And next Friday, we're going to talk about a radically reimagined villain that appeared in Justice League one time. In the comics, he was the personification of God's wrath, but in the cartoons, he was very different. We're going to talk about Eclipso. Hope to see you then.